Hi everybody, Brennan Clinch, Solutions Architect for the Aruba team here at Synex. I just wanted to come back again today and discuss Aruba's hospitality access points. Those are the access points that you see on the website and their brochures. They're denoted by an H at the end of their model number. You've got anywhere from a 205H, even maybe the newer 203H, or even the high-end 303H. And these are hospitality APs that are purpose-built to go into hospitality verticals, mostly, of course, hotels, but they can also work in things like college dorm rooms or remote branch offices. They're basically just meant for small deployments where they have a little bit more directionality in terms of their RF propagation. And it's not necessarily built for high capacity, but we're going to address each one of the currently available APs, and there's even one in the 802.11n standard that's still available, and we'll talk about that one as well. So let's go ahead and hop in here. I'm going to go ahead and hop into my favorite tool. You hear me talk about it a lot if you watch these videos, and that's the Aruba AP comparison tool on their website. And basically, just so you know how I got here, again, we're at arubanetworks.com, and I went to products, went to access points, and there you can select an option to compare APs as you highlight over them. So today I'm just going to focus on the three newest available APs for the hospitality vertical, the 203H, the 205H, and the 303H. These three differ specifically on just a few things, but they're all built for the hospitality environment, or that sort of AP per room, per dorm room, low capacity, kind of somewhat directional RF propagation environments where they can be deployed in this way. And as you can see under each of these, you can kind of get an idea based on the summary of what they're for. Basically, the 203H, it's still a new AP. You might notice that the design is a little newer than even the 205H, which might be a little bit higher spec in some ways, but it is an older AP, but it is also more expensive than the 203H, which is a relatively new one from Aruba. And then they introduced the 802.11ac Wave 2, their first hospitality AP in that standard, the 303H. And these are all very powerful access points for this particular vertical, but they do differ in some specific areas, and I want to go ahead and hop into that specifically. So first thing is the interesting part about these to me. In this 203H, there's this ability to change how our spatial streams work depending on if we want to use single radio or dual radio deployments. And what I mean when I say that is you can either have the 2.4 gigahertz band operational or the 5 gigahertz band operational, or both. But when you do both, if you notice that where it says that dual radio, this dual radio business right here, this is where we've got both the 2.4 gigahertz band on and the 5 gigahertz band on, and when we have both of those on, they're both going to operate in 1 by 1 by 1, meaning one transmit by one receive equaling one spatial stream. Whereas if we just say let's just do the 2.4 gigahertz or let's just do the 5 gigahertz band, at that point whichever band you're using can operate at 2 by 2 using two spatial streams, and that's important. You know, the more spatial streams, the more transmit receive chains you have, the more likely you're going to be able to service clients that have those amount of transmit receive antennas more effectively, and you know, where technology is today, that's a pretty common thing. So just keep that in mind as you look at a 203H. It is definitely the most affordable, and with that comes, you know, a little bit lower in terms of spec compared to the 205H and definitely to the 303H. So let's go ahead and kind of keep going through here a couple of different things I just want you to notice. Again, here's our radio MIMO type. Of course, with the 303H, we can start using multi-user MIMO, even though it's 2 by 2 by 2. You still have that capability. And then again, you can see in the 203H, we're just into that dual radio or single radio spatial stream mode. And then the 205H sits at 2 by 2 by 2 using single user MIMO. Now, the other thing is, if you'll notice, the 203H only allows for 8 SSIDs per radio, and the number of clients per radio is 32. And again, bearing in mind that if we turn both radios on, we might be able to get 64 clients per total, 32 per radio, but they're all going to be operating at 1 by 1 by 1, whereas we can do 32, but we can give them higher performance at 2 by 2 by 2. And I don't necessarily see in these verticals where you're going to need more than 8 SSIDs, but that limitation is there just so you are aware. Now, The interesting thing here, and I want to kind of bring this up, is the integrated antennas. They are directional antennas, or at least semi-directional. I'm going to pull up the data sheets for these guys, and I want you to look real quick. Let's look at this first one, okay? We can talk about what these things mean, and we'll get into RF propagation in a more advanced video. But for the time being, just so you can understand what these plots mean. So the 205H, right? Horizontal or azimuth plane, basically the top view of the AP front facing left. Okay, so I've got a 205H with me here today, and basically this chart is if you were to look at it from a bird's eye view like this. Okay, pretending the ground is here and it's sitting right up on a desk. Okay, we're looking at it from the top down, and we're trying to see basically the pattern that's going around it. How far around is it? Okay, or in this case, sort of like this. We'll see that in the elevation pattern as well, but basically we're wanting to see that circular plane. So if I take a peek at it and pretend as though I'm looking at it bird's eye view, where it's facing to our left, looking at this screen, okay, we're still on top of it, but we can see sort of the ground that it covers. You know, this will give you an idea, sort of like a map. You're looking at on top of a geographical map. You're seeing the footprint of this AP on that azimuth plane, and you can see it in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz range, and you can see that if it's facing the left, even though we're looking at the top of it, you'll see that it's got much farther reach to the front end of it than it does at the back end of it. And again, this is important because this is supposed to be set up on desks and in environments, again, where it's going to be sort of pushing forward, not necessarily all around. It's meant to be in a specific place in the room or on a desk in the room. And you can see even here the elevation pattern, the elevation plane. So just for sake of example, I'll take the same AP. Before we kind of looked at it like this, right, where we're at a bird's eye view and we could see the pattern around it. Okay, so if we take this up, right, we can still see it's the same pattern this way. But now that we know how far it reaches, front and back, let's see how high and low it reaches as well in the elevation plane. Right, so if I have this little guy and we're looking at this chart where it says, you know, we're facing left, okay? So basically at this point you can see that the elevation plane, if we're at the side view AP front facing left, it goes a little bit higher than it goes lower, right, in both bands. So in this case, sort of match that up, we kind of see that the bubble goes down this way. It still has some propagation patterns out here, and again the reach is about out yonder and maybe just a little shorter on the backside here, but it's going up relatively high. So that's because if you're walking around in an office environment, you know, the people are going to be standing a lot of times. If it's on a desk mount, which is what these things are normally built to do, they're going to want to sort of push that signal up, not necessarily down. It's not supposed to be hung on a wall. Compare that, for instance, to another AP. Let's just, for sake of example, I've pulled up a 310 here. Now, I don't have a 310 with me today, but if I go down, this is sort of normally where you'd see, you know, these APs mounted on a ceiling grid or something like that. So if we look at this particular diagram, we can see that the horizontal or azimuth plane, which we're going to be pretending that we're at the top view with the AP facing forward again. So if I were to take this is a 115, right? So we're gonna again turn it sideways, but we're gonna be looking at the top again. And the reason you can tell again, the lights here on the bottom, we're looking at the very top where the USB dongle is for the 115. So you can see in that pattern, it's actually going. Again, we'll look at it again, but basically the pattern is such that it's going all the way around evenly. It's not like the 205H where we kind of, here's the front, where we had a little bit more weighted on this side and a little bit less on this back side. This is even distribution around. It might not go as far in the front because, again, you can only manipulate physics so much, but it's specifically designed to address more of a broad area, all sides of it. And if we hop back in here, you can see that that's exactly what's going on. So if we're looking at the top of it like we just were, it's got a pretty even reach all the way around it in both bands. Now, if we look at the elevation plane where the AP is facing down, you know, if we're looking at this, the pattern in that sheet shows that you've got a much heavier distribution on going on the front facing side of it, right? If it's going down, because this again is supposed to be mounted on a ceiling like this, so it's going to have a much broader scope down here than it would necessarily on the back side. Whereas before, again, we were looking at the top end and we were seeing, okay, how far is this measure around? Okay, that's fine. This is a bit of a different pattern now that we're looking at it. So you would just want to make sure that you're getting your propagation patterns understood, so that you understand the environment, you understand where it's supposed to be hung and where it's supposed to go. So getting back into the comparisons, the next thing we'll get into are the interfaces. Now, this is what's always interesting. These APs will always come. They have this little pass-through cable. Now, its uplink is right here. Okay, this is the ETH0 uplink. This is where your uplink's going to be. This is the back of a 205H, but you'll see the same thing on a 203H or a 205H. I'm sorry, a 303H or a 203H. And basically, what this pass-through is, if you look at the bottom of the unit, you can see that there is an ETH0 pass-through as well. And this isn't necessarily meant to be your uplink, okay? What this is supposed to be, let's say that you mount this on a wall mount, right? So if this is the wall mount and we connect it, which is the other way it can be mounted versus doing a desk stand. If we mount it like this, a lot of times we're mounting it where there's an RF jack there, and that's supposed to directly connect right to this Ethernet 0 uplink port. But sometimes you're in an environment where you've got a pass-through port where you've got another Ethernet jack right next to it, and it gets covered because the mount that comes with this is supposed to be on a single gang wall mount where you can fit 2 Ethernet jacks. And so what you can do is you can put a little Ethernet cable. These are ordered separately. You can get 10 packs of these, so you could just get one for sake of example. And it would basically allow that to pass straight through. You're not worrying about VLANs, you're not worrying about management. This is basically just an extension of the wall jack. So what you do is it plugs in there, okay, into that back port and this secondary port that's not being used as the uplink for the AP. Then on the bottom, this ETH0 continues that pass through. So again, if you need to patch something else in, a phone of any kind, anything else that you just need wire connectivity for, straight back to the switch, this is basically an extension of the wall jack. And then you'll see also this E3, this is in red, whereas the other two are in blue. The red is indicating that this particular port, when it's in a particular powered mode, it can provide PoE. And we'll look at those PoE specs here in just 1 second. So if I take a peek, though, back at these network interfaces, we can see we've got one pass-through on all 3 models. The differences are sort of our downlinks, right? We've got 1 gig Ethernet for an uplink, and on these two, the 205H and the 303H, we have 3 gigabit Ethernet local ports, right? E1, E2, and E3. Whereas on this 203H, we have 1 of those. Okay, again, this is to preserve cost. This is to keep you from paying so highly with this. So the other couple of things just to notice, PoE power in terms of you can provide PoE from these again out of that 1 port, but on the 303H it's disabled if the AP itself is being powered by only 802.3 AF instead of a DC power connection or 802.3 AT. And again, now the 205H can kind of work either way, but you notice the 203H does not provide any sort of power over Ethernet outside of it, and you'll notice here there is no power cable. This has to be powered by 802.3 AF standards. Now, you can get a power injector that's part of the ordering guide for this thing, but it's not going to have a DC plug-in for itself. And that's about all that I wanted to show you. There are a couple other things down here talking about max IPsec, encrypted wire throughput. This is when we start converting these things to be used as wraps if we want to tunnel them back to a controller. You can do that, but you can see the specs are there accordingly. 20 IPsec tunnels versus 40 versus 100 in the 303H. And then, of course, there's spectrum analysis. So spectrum analysis is something that you do in your deployment, which I certainly recommend. The 203H does not support that. Only the 205H and 303H do. That was just a kind of a quick overview of the hospitality APs. Again, I just wanted to kind of talk about those products because I get a lot of questions about them. They're kind of a unique shape and size compared to the sort of standard APs. This 115 is about the size of about a 305 that you normally find in the 300 series if you're more familiar with that, or even a 205 in the 200 series. And just for size comparison, you can see these are quite a bit smaller, okay? And they do have desk mounts that can come with them that'll sit up straight on a stand, and you might have seen that. I'll pull up the data sheet here just so you can see exactly what that looks like. So here's a 203H on its particular its particular desk stand. And you can see how that works. Now, what you can do, there are mounting brackets as well for dual gang wall boxes. If you have one of those wall mounts that is 4 particular units instead of just the 2, like, plugs that you can stack on top of each other. If there's 4 plugs, you can do a separate dual gang wall mount order if you would like, but it comes with the single gang wall mount for these particular APs. And the 303Hs actually come in kits where it will pre-assemble that desk mount for you and include a power cable as well. So all these things to consider. I know it's a lot of information, but I just wanted to overview those real quick. There is a 103H available, but again, that's an 802.11n standard AP, and we're kind of moving away from that. We're moving on to new standards. I'd assume that the 802.11 AC Wave 2 is even starting to move on to the next phase of standards. So just bear that in mind when you go to order your hospitality APs. Start looking at the 200 series and then 303H as well. Again, this is Brennan Clinch, Solutions Architect for the Synex team, signing off. If you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. My email address is BrennanK, that's BRENNAN, the letter K, at Synex.com. Or if you just want to know more about Synex and how it can bring value to your Aruba deployments, if you want to know how we can help you get educated in Aruba, please let us know. Our email address to reach for that is Aruba@Synex.com. And again, that is Aruba@Synex.com. Until next time, see you guys.